And so I'm going to punt it back over to you, Mary Caitlin. Anything you would add to what you've already said vis-a-vis BVLOS for ops over people when you're advising on a waiver package?
You know, Dawn, I think you're right that many of the practical tips I gave for BVLOS are equally applicable to ops over people, with one slight twist. The main risk when you're flying over people is that the drone could lose altitude and injure a person on the ground, right? So in general terms, you can propose mitigating this risk by using an aircraft that has features that will reduce the potential impact if that were to happen. Examples of these kinds of features that are currently available on the market include lightweight drones with either shrouded propellers that eliminate the sharp rotating blades, or lightweight drones that actually collapse on impact, or also using a parachute to reduce the kinetic energy on impact and reduce the overall injury potential.
That's a probably great segue to Dr. Nilsson, who has some experience with some of these systems. So do you have any tips, or you want to expand on Mary Caitlin's answer?
Yes, she mentioned the parachute. Right now, ParaZero seems to be the product most of the industry is using. The downside is that it's quite expensive. I've never submitted for that waiver, but from what I understand, questions asked on the form can be answered with the documentation that comes with ParaZero if you purchase the waiver kit with the parachute. So for example, you can buy the parachute for $200, but if you want the waiver kit that will help you answer your risk mitigation questions, that's another $1,000 on top of it. So I think that's kind of where we're at with the parachute stuff.
Well, that's a good transition, because I think when we all think about delivering packages, right, we've seen pictures of people dropping things, or you have this visual of a parachute or a drone coming down. So let's transition to Part 135. We've seen some recent extraordinary developments in this area, this idea of drone package delivery, and when it comes to waivers and these Part 135 approvals. I know DroneUp recently sealed a deal with Walmart, and UPS and Matternet have been delivering medicine out in North Carolina for a while now as part of the IPP. So I'm going to ask Mary Caitlin to walk us through Part 135 a little bit, what it is, what it does for the uninitiated in the audience.
Sure, Donald. I'll do my best to give a quick and broad overview of Part 135. Part 135 is the Federal Aviation Regulation that governs commercial non-scheduled operators, such as private air charter and air taxi flights, so traditionally manned aircraft, right? Compared to Part 191 operators, 135 operators are required to work within a much more detailed and strict operational and legal framework. With one of the major differences being that Part 135 operators are required to hold safety authority from the FAA in the form of a Part 135 operating certificate. FAA regulations also require Part 135 operators to have a full team of management personnel to oversee all aspects of the operation, including, for example, a chief pilot and a director of maintenance. So really a full-scale traditional manned aviation program. And because Part 135 was developed for manned aviation, compliance with many of its technical requirements is just going to be impossible for a drone operator. For example, drone delivery operators would need to obtain exemptions from provisions requiring the use of seatbelts, passenger deplaning plans, and onboard operations manuals, among a host of other requirements that just don't fit most small drones that are going to be delivering packages. I think it's definitely encouraging that we are seeing more companies successfully navigate the exemption and certification process. But for a lot of operators, this may be time and cost prohibitive to pursue. Now, another consideration I want to mention is that Part 135 operators that conduct interstate deliveries for compensation or hire are also going to need to have economic authority or an exemption from the Department of Transportation. And in order to hold this economic authority, the operator must be a U.S. citizen as defined by the Federal Aviation Regulations. And I won't get into that, but I will tell you that it is probably not what you think it is. The definition is very arcane and specific. Now, the DOT has determined that drone delivery operators should apply for economic authority using the air taxi exemption. Now, this is a shorter, much more simple process than the full fitness requirement that's normally required for, if you think about larger airlines. This is the topic I could go on about, but I'll stop here and just note that drone operators interested in obtaining a 135 certificate should discuss these issues with Aviation Council before pursuing it.
And before we go on, because I have some questions for David and Ryan on this, Mary Caitlin, you mentioned, I believe it was Part 91 in contrast to Part 135. Could you just elaborate on that?
Sure, Dawn. So Part 91 are the general operating rules that apply really to any operator that wants to access the national airspace system. So there are pieces of Part 91 like that prevent the reckless operation of an aircraft that will apply regardless of whether you're operating under 135 or 121, which is the air transport category when you think about our passenger airlines. So a lot of operators who are not receiving compensation, or they are not conducting operations for hire, they'll be operating under Part 91 if they're not a full-scale airline. Similarly, when we think about how this translates to drone operators, there are a lot of drone operators that are operating under Part 91 now, under exemptions, and these are, if you think about the operators who are outside of the scope of 107, so drones that are over 55 pounds or that want to conduct more complex operations, oftentimes those are conducted under 91.
That's amazing. I always learn so much when I have this, and when I work with amazing experts like this group. It's hard though in this context, as we're here on Zoom, not to fully address the idea that we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? So my question to you, David, or Ryan, really, is given Part 135 and this need in the pandemic for, for example, delivering medicine remotely and things like that, are you seeing any additional approvals or any leniency when it comes to approving these drone airlines under Part 135, just given the current environment?
I believe this one can actually be better answered by Ryan, but there's current certifications going on at this time.
Yeah, so right now we have the IPP, which has the 135s and what they're going through. But what I can say towards folks that want to learn more about what they're doing and how to become a 135. When we talk Part 135, we are talking Title 14 of the CFRs. And the first step you want to do is go to that CFR website and look at the actual regulation. So actually read the regulation, see what it's about. Now, getting a 135 certificate is a bit more of a process compared to 107. Exactly what Mary said before. Now, there's a lot of exemptions you're going to need because, of course, just like Mary said, there's no seat belts. You're not carrying passengers. You can actually see each exemption from the current 135s out there, the Amazons, the zip lines, the UPS flight forwards. Later on, I'll have a few websites on the end of this presentation where you can actually go to regulations.gov and see what Amazon said, how they exempted themselves from certain regulations, how UPS Flight Forward did the same. The FAA also has a whole bunch of websites about package delivery by drone, Part 135, and the 135 certification process for both manned and drone operators. And those links will be provided at the end. But essentially, when you go through the process, no matter how big or how small your 135 operation is going to be, you're still going to go through a 5-phased certification process. The FAA has it's a cookie cutter for the most part, where phase 1 is your pre-application, phase 2 is a formal application, Phase 3 is your design and the assessment of your design. Phase 4 is your performance and the assessment thereof. And phase 5 would be administrative functions, where the FAA catches up on their computer systems, certificating your Part 135. But all information can be found right on the links that'll be provided to you later.
You know, as an attorney and also an educator, I'm giving you the little heart symbol there, if you can see it, Ryan, because you said CFRs, and that's the Code of Federal Regulations, everybody. And you also told people to actually go to them and read them. What a concept. Go to the primary sources. Don't just go to websites summarizing stuff. Go to the actual regulation and read it for yourself. So when you talk about practical tips, you get the gold star for the day. I have to tell you, Ryan. So that's amazing.